I'm going to continue on talking about how do we get the energy out of NADH and FADH and convert that energy into the formation of ATP. So we're going to talk about the electron transport chain. And when I'm thinking about these energy carrying molecules, I think about going to the grocery store. And I can go into the grocery store, and in order to get food, I have to give them money. And in Corning, New York, you have to give them American money. But let's say I had all these euros, and that's kind of like the NADH and the FADH. They're euros, and I can't walk into Wegmans and use euros. So I have to go to the bank, the electron transport chain, and convert those euros into American money. And if we think about the ATP as the American money and these other energy carriers as the euros, so the electron transport chain is going to get the energy out of them and make ATP. Now, the electron transport chain is really amazing and clever, and you could spend lectures on just how that works. And I'm going to, again, just give you the big picture. And what happens is these high energy molecules, these NADHs and FADHs, they transfer their electrons to these different molecules in the electron transport chain. Now, you might remember when you learned about mitochondria with eukaryotic cells, that the mitochondria had all these, where most ATP was made. The mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. And so it's because there's these electron carrier molecules that are embedded in the mitochondria. In bacteria, since they don't have mitochondria, they're just in the plasma membrane. And so here's all these molecules, and electrons get passed from NADH and FADH to the first electron carrier. And they pass the electrons to the next, and to the next, to the next, to the next. Now I think about this kind of like a line of people. And if I had a beach ball, and the electrons are the beach ball, and I pass the beach ball to the first person, and they pass it to the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and the next person. The last person in line is now standing there holding a beach ball. What happens is somebody else walks in the room, that's this guy right here, grabs those electrons, grabs the beach ball, and walks away. So now I can keep sending electrons down here, as long as a molecule comes and takes the electrons off the last one. Think if somebody did not take the beach ball from the last person. They would send the beach ball down the row, and this guy already has a beach ball, so now the beach ball would get here. And these two would be holding a beach ball. And now another beach ball is sent down. And eventually this whole thing would just back up. So as long as you have somebody down here picking the beach ball from the last person and walking away, you can keep shuttling beach balls, or in a cell, electrons, down the electron transport chain. Now, what I'm going to tell you are two important things. As long as electrons are being passed down the electron transport chain, you can power this enzyme. And there's an enzyme that takes ADP and makes ATP. That's our whole point of this pathway. We want to make ATP. There's an enzyme, and somebody gave it a beautiful name. They called it ATP synthase. ATP synthase. So go on your picture and write right there, ATP synthase, S-Y-N-T-H-A-S-E, ATP synthase. So as long as you have electrons transferring down the electron transport chain, ATP synthase will work and make ATP. So that's one thing to label. The other thing to label is, who the heck is this crazy guy that walks in and takes away the electrons? Well, we're missing something from our overall equation. Where's oxygen? Turns out oxygen is something we call a final electron acceptor. A final electron acceptor. And so in your picture that you have in your notes, label this molecule right there as oxygen. When oxygen picks up electrons, they come in the form of hydrogen. And so we're adding some hydrogens, and so the product here is water. So oxygen picks up the beach ball, the electrons, and becomes water. So label this one as water. So if we go back and we look at our original equation for aerobic cellular respiration, we're putting in glucose, we're putting in oxygen, we're breathing in oxygen, and we're releasing carbon dioxide. It's just a waste product. We're releasing water. It's a waste product. But the whole reason why we needed to do this whole metabolic pathway was to make all this ATP. And even though the numbers aren't labeled in this picture, in this diagram, I want you to know that the electron transport chain makes a lot more ATP than glycolysis and Krebs put together. The electron transport chain, the amount of ATP that's coming out here is a lot more than it is in here. Okay? So I want you to try to talk that through. And I'm just going to do it one more time, just as this is what you should be able to do. Okay, here I go. You should be able to do this. In aerobic cellular respiration, glucose is metabolized by a pathway called glycolysis, and it's converted into 2 pyruvic acid molecules. It releases some ATP and some NADH. Pyruvic acid is further metabolized in the Krebs cycle. In the process, it's going to, the pyruvic acid is going to be completely broken down into carbon dioxide. Metabolism continues and ATP is released, as well as some other high energy carrying molecules, NADH and FADH. The energy in NADH and FADH is used to make ATP by the electron transport chain, which drives an enzyme called ATP synthase. In order to keep the electron transport chain going, you need oxygen, which is the final electron acceptor, and it is converted to water. Your book says, uses the word terminal electron acceptor sometimes. So final electron acceptor and terminal electron acceptor mean the same thing. Let's look at this question before we go to the next video. It says, what happens if there is no available oxygen? So we take away the oxygen, we stop the electron transport chain, we can't make all this ATP, that backs all this up. And so without oxygen, we can only get a small amount of ATP. In fact, it all backs up all the way to here. Without oxygen, you can only get a small amount of ATP. So if you're an aerobic organism, you're going to have a hard time getting enough energy to function. What happens to us when we don't get oxygen? We die very quickly. This whole metabolic pathway is going on all the time, and it has to be happening all the time in our cells to keep us alive. Now, in bacteria, remember, there's some cells that are things like facultative anaerobes. They can grow with oxygen or without oxygen, and we're going to look at some of those examples. I'm going to stop right there, and we'll go on to the next topic in the next video.